The snow was falling so heavy it looked like the sky had forgotten how to do anything else. It swirled and screamed through the pine trees that lined the Wind River Ridge, burying everything in silence except for the pounding at Tawny Washaki's door. 3 heavy knocks, ragged and desperate. He didn't move at first. Just sat there, bones aching, eyes hollow, staring into the fire that hadn't warmed him in 4 years. He'd heard every sound this land could make: coyotes, wolves, wind, creaking wood. But this was different. This was a fist. Human. Hurting. Tawny rose, slow but sharp. Instinct didn't age the way men did. He grabbed the rifle propped beside the door, not because he feared ghosts, but because sometimes the living were worse. He opened it with care, just enough to see, just enough to aim if he had to. A boy collapsed into his arms. Snow soaked his torn coat, blood already frozen at the edges. He couldn't have been more than 15. Tawny caught him before he hit the ground and pulled him inside fast. Behind him, standing in the doorway like a shadow in the storm, was a little girl, 7, maybe younger. Her dress was threadbare, the sleeves ripped. Rags wrapped around her feet. Her hair clung to her cheeks, soaked and stiff. She held a rag doll against her chest, like it was stitched from bone. She didn't cry. Didn't move. "Please," the boy gasped, his voice barely a whisper. "Please, sir. Hide my sister. They're coming." Tawny didn't ask who. He'd seen the look in the boy's eyes before, on soldiers too young to shave, on mothers who held their dead in the rain, on himself in the mirror when he buried his wife and daughter under the pine tree out back. He looked at the girl. She didn't blink. Her eyes were deep and old, too old for her face. "Get in," he said. She stepped inside without a sound. He shut the door behind her and threw the bar. The wind howled, slamming against the logs like it wanted in. The boy sank to the floor, clutching his shoulder. Blood spread across his side. Tawny knelt beside him, peeling back the coat. Through and through by the look of it. A clean wound if they were lucky. If not, well, luck hadn't visited this ridge in a long while. "What's your name?" Tawny asked, ripping a length of flannel from an old shirt. "Chaska. My sister's a yoka. She don't talk." Since when? Chaska winced as Tawny pressed the cloth against the hole. "Since she saw him shoot our pa. She ain't said a word since." Tawny glanced at the girl again. She stood by the fire, now still as stone. The doll in her arms was missing a button eye. Her lips moved slightly, but no sound came out. Praying, maybe. Or remembering. He tied the bandage tight. "How far you come?" 3 days walking. 2 on foot, 1 we stole a mule. He gave out this morning. Almost didn't make it. You made it." Chaska reached out, grabbed Tawny's wrist with surprising strength. "He'll kill her, just like Pa. You gotta hide her. In the root cellar. The attic. Anywhere. Who's Silas Grady?" Chaska's voice cracked. "He's got men, guns, bought the sheriff, the judge. Pa had a deed, legal deed to our land. Grady wanted it. When Pa said no, he shot him. Ayoka saw it." Tawny's jaw tightened. He'd heard the name. Everyone on the reservation had. Grady had moved in 5 years back with cattle bribes and enough hired guns to call it an army. Took whatever he wanted and buried what he didn't. "And you?" Tawny asked. "You see it, I was in the shed. Heard it. Then I saw him dragging her. She kicked, bit him. He laughed, said she'd see worse." Tawny didn't speak for a long moment. The fire crackled behind him, throwing shadows on the log walls. "Get her to the cellar," Mr. Chaska said. "They'll be here. They always find us." Tawny stood slowly, crossed the room. Ayoka didn't flinch as he approached. She just watched him. Her eyes never left his. He didn't open the cellar. He didn't open the attic. He set a bowl of broth in front of her. She didn't move. If they come, Tawny said, his voice low steady, they'll find her standing right here, and they'll have to go through me first. Chaska's breath hitched. That's suicide. Maybe. You don't even know us. Tawny's eyes were fixed on the little girl. Don't need to. Outside, the wind screamed like a dying thing, the kind of sound that made men think of their sins. Tawny reached for the lantern, struck a match, and set it in the window. What are you doing? Chaska whispered. Telling them where we are. The boy stared. That's crazy. No. Tawny turned. That's a message. He moved to the rifle and laid it across his lap. Sat in the chair by the window, same one he'd sat in for 4 winters straight. Hiding didn't save my wife, he said. Didn't save my daughter. Chaska blinked. What happened? They went to town while I stayed back. Thought I could work it out. Talk sense. Thought if I laid low, didn't provoke, he'd spare them. Tawny's voice grew cold. Found them at the bottom of a ravine. Wagon accident, they called it. Ayoka stepped forward then, just 1 step. Her bare feet silent on the floorboards. She reached out and touched Tawny's hand. Small fingers. Cold. He looked down at her eyes, burning. You're safe here, little one, he said. I promise you that. She didn't speak, but she nodded. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, for the first time in 4 years, Tawny felt something shift. He wasn't just waiting to die anymore. He was waiting to fight. And far off in the woods, beyond the ridge, a figure on horseback watched the lantern glow in the window and turned his horse toward town. Grady would hear about this. They would come, and Tawny Washakie would be ready. The sound of hooves broke the silence before dawn. Tawny was already outside his breath, white in the cold air, the rifle slung across his back. The lantern still burned in the window like a dare casting a faint glow on the snow. He didn't flinch, didn't hide. He stood tall on his porch as the rider approached through the frost-bitten pines, steam rising from the horse's flanks. The man pulled up short. Black duster, narrow eyes, a crooked mouth that looked like it hadn't known kindness in years. His name was Elias Crow, one of Silas Grady's oldest men. Crow didn't come alone. Behind him rode 3 others, armed, hard-faced, and silent. Tawny's hand hovered near the rifle but didn't touch it yet. Crow tipped his hat, mock respect. Mighty bold light you've got in that window, Washakie. It's a free ridge last I checked. Crow chuckled low and dark. Ain't nothing free under Grady, not even the air. You want something boy and girl. Crow's eyes flicked to the cabin. Heard they wandered off. Cold out. Dangerous. Thought maybe they found your porch. You heard wrong. Crow's smile twisted. That's so Tawny didn't blink. There's no kids here. Just me and ghosts. Behind the cracked cabin wall, Ayoka crouched near the woodpile, hands clutching the doll tighter than breath. Chaska lay bundled on the cot, face pale, sweat damp on his brow. Tawny had warned them not to move, not to make a sound. Crow dismounted slowly, letting his boots crunch the snow. Mind if we look around, just to be sure? I do mind. Crow's smile vanished. This is Shoshone land, Tawny said, and this is my father's house. You ride through that door, you're declaring war. Another man dismounted, hand resting on his pistol. We're just looking. Don't mean harm. Then ride on, Tawny said. You got no claim here. Crow stepped forward. That girl saw things, said things she shouldn't. Grady just wants to talk to her. She don't talk, then she can listen. Tawny's hand went to the rifle. Crow froze. Careful, old man. You brought a threat to my door. I'm just answering. A silence heavier than snowfall settled. Then Crow laughed again, high and cold. You always were the fool with too much backbone. Thought that war of yours had broken you. It did, Tawny said. But it taught me where to stand. Crow nodded to his men. Let's go. One lingered, glancing at the cabin. Crow snapped now. They rode off without another word, disappearing into the pines like wolves melting into brush. But the air didn't feel safer when they left. It felt like the moment before lightning strikes. Tawny waited until their tracks faded, then went back inside. Chaska struggled to sit up. He knows. I reckon he does. Ayoka looked up from the corner. She hadn't moved since the first hoofbeat. Her eyes were too wide, too still. Tawny crouched beside her. You did good, little one. She didn't blink. Her lips parted, but nothing came. Chaska gritted his teeth. They'll come back. I know. More men. I know. You should have handed us over, Chaska said bitterly. Would have been easier. Tawny rose. Easier ain't the same as right. Chaska's fists balled in the quilt. What if they kill you? What happens to her then? I die with a clean soul. That's more than Grady can say. Silence followed. Not comfort, but something like resolve. Later that day, Tawny hitched his mule to the sled and headed toward the trading post in Red Bluff Ridge. Supplies were low, and Winter didn't care about vendettas. He didn't take the main road. He took the old trapper paths through the hills, winding beneath the pine canopy, wind biting at his face. At the post, Abigail Redmoon stood behind the counter with her sleeves rolled and a shotgun under the till. Half Cheyenne, half Irish Abigail had run the store alone since her husband died 2 winters back. She watched Tawny with that sharp, knowing look she was famous for. Didn't think you'd show till spring, she said. I need flour, salt, and 30-30 rounds. Her brow arched, expecting company already had some. Abigail's eyes narrowed. Crow, yup. She measured the grain with a careful hand. Word's out about the kids. Folks say Grady's put a bounty out, real quiet like. Not legal, but tempting. I need boots for a child, Tawny added. And a coat. Abigail stopped. So it's true. They're with me. You planning to run? No. She set the scoop down. Then you're a damn fool. Brave, but fool. Tawny met her eyes. I buried my family trying to avoid a fight. I won't bury another child because I hesitated. Abigail exhaled slowly, then reached below the counter and pulled out a box. It's not much, but it'll keep her warm. Belonged to my niece. Thank you. She leaned in. I know a man. Caleb 10 Bears. Blacksmith down the canyon. Choctaw and stubborn as granite. If you're building a stand, you'll need more than a rifle and pride. Tawny nodded. Send him to me. Abigail's voice softened. You think you can win, he said, but I can make them bleed. As he loaded the sled, a rider on a sorrel mare watched from the ridge, thin, snake-eyed, a scout for Grady. Tawny didn't look up, but he knew. The war had begun. Not the kind with banners and bugles, but the old kind, the blood kind that soaked into dirt and memory. He arrived home before sundown. Ayoka was waiting on the porch, her new coat wrapped around her like a promise. She didn't run. She didn't smile, but she looked him in the eye. Inside, Chaska was sitting up now, stronger. He nodded to Tawny. We're staying, huh? We're staying. Chaska's voice was firm. Then I want to learn to shoot. Tawny paused, then handed him the unloaded rifle. First you learn to clean it. Then we'll talk about shooting. He stepped outside, looking east toward the distant line of trees where shadows moved like ghosts in the snow. Grady would come, but this time the ridge wouldn't be silent. I buried my family trying to avoid a fight. I won't bury another child because I hesitated. The forge in Caleb Tenbear's smithy roared with heat sparks jumping like fireflies in the dim light. Caleb moved with the weight of a man who knew iron better than people, tall, thick-shouldered, his hands blackened with soot and callus. His eyes narrowed as Tawny approached through the brush behind the workshop rifle strapped across his chest and frost clinging to his coat. Abigail had sent word ahead. "I don't take sides," Caleb said flatly before Tawny even reached the porch. Tawny didn't stop walking. "I ain't asking you to. I'm asking you to remember what it means to stand for someone smaller than you." Caleb wiped his hands on a rag, watching the mountains in the distance. "Last time I stood for someone, I buried a friend. That was enough." "Then don't do it for me," Tawny said. "Do it for a girl who won't speak and a boy who's too proud to run." Caleb studied him for a long moment. "Grady's men watching the ridge, they've already come to my door once. Next time they won't knock." Caleb turned back into the smithy and pulled out a length of iron. He dropped it into the coals and adjusted the bellows. "If I help you, I'm all in. That means hammer blood and whatever comes after. That's what I came for." Caleb didn't answer, but he didn't say no either. He just kept working the fire. By nightfall, they were at Tawny's cabin, and the sky hung low with clouds threatening snow. Chaska was at the table cleaning the rifle hands, slow but steady. Ayoka sat near the hearth, the new coat still draped around her, her eyes following everything without speaking. Caleb noticed the way she tracked them, the way she pressed the doll against her chest, but never loosened her grip. He crouched beside her, voice low. "That your sister?" She didn't answer, but her eyes flicked to Chaska. "She's seen too much," Tawny said. "But she watches everything." "I can work with that," Caleb muttered. They began early the next morning. Tawny and Caleb dragged logs from the frozen edge of the woods, splitting and shaping them into barricades. Chaska helped where he could, holding hammering fetching nails. He asked questions, sharp ones. Tawny noticed. The boy wasn't just helping, he was learning. "What are we building?" Chaska asked. "A reason for Grady to hesitate," Caleb replied without looking up. They reinforced the cabin's doors, rigged slits between the logs for rifle barrels, and set steel traps along the east slope. Caleb crafted nails and hinges from scrap iron hammer ringing through the ridge like war drums. By midweek, the place no longer looked like a retreat. It looked like a holdfast. One night, as snow fell heavy, Chaska stood outside with Tawny under the porch eaves. The silence between them was thick, broken only by the creak of snow-laden pine branches. "You ever been scared?" Chaska asked. "Every day since the war." "How do you live with it?" "I don't," Tawny said. "I fight through it." Chaska nodded slowly. "I want to be like that." "You will be," Tawny answered. "But first you learn not to shoot your foot off." Inside, Caleb set a cup of tea near Ayoka. She didn't drink, just stared at it like it might disappear. He didn't push her. Instead, he pulled a pocket knife from his belt and whittled quietly, letting the rhythm of the blade fill the space between them. When she finally looked up, he handed her the small carving, a bird with wings stretched in flight. "For you," he said. "Birds don't talk much either, but they still sing." She didn't speak, but she reached for it. That night, Tawny took the high ridge trail toward the town. Grady's influence didn't sleep, and he needed to know who else was standing with him or against. As he neared the trail's edge, he saw movement, a man crouched near a hollowed stump rifle in hand eyes fixed on the valley below. Tawny's breath caught. The scout didn't hear him approach. He slipped behind the man, pressed the muzzle of his Winchester to the back of his neck. "I'd think twice," Tawny said. The man froze. "I ain't here to start trouble. You're breathing on my land. That's enough." The man raised his hands slowly. "Name's Isaiah 3 Feathers. I used to ride with Grady. Don't anymore. Why not? Because he stopped asking questions and started burning homes. Last one was a preacher's. Tawny stepped back a foot, still keeping the rifle up. You scouting or watching, making sure Grady don't slip a knife in your back before you're ready. Tawny hesitated. Why warn me? Because that little girl saw something I couldn't unsee. Her eyes, man. They were like still water after a storm. I figure anyone willing to kill a kid for silence doesn't deserve to breathe. Tawny lowered the rifle slightly. You any good with that weapon? I can shoot fleas off a coyote at 200 yards. Then get off that ridge and come down. You're with us now. Isaiah grinned. Didn't think I'd fight with a Washakie, a Choctaw, and 2 kids in a shack. But here we are. They returned to the cabin under cover of dark. Caleb raised an eyebrow at the newcomer but said nothing. Tawny explained enough to earn a nod. I don't trust him, Chaska said. You don't have to trust him, Tawny replied. You just need to watch his back while he watches ours. That night, the wind howled like ghosts lost in the pines. Inside the cabin, they passed a single flask around the fire. Isaiah told a story about Grady nearly getting trampled by a wild bull. Caleb chuckled. Tawny cracked a rare smile, and even Chaska let out a quiet laugh. Only Ahyoka sat silent watching the flames. When the laughter faded, Tawny looked to the others. He's coming soon. Caleb nodded. Let him come. Tawny stared into the fire voice like stone. We don't run. We don't give the girl up. We hold. And if we fall, Isaiah asked, we fall standing. I figure anyone willing to kill a kid for silence doesn't deserve to breathe. The first sound was the crunch of boots on snow, slow, deliberate, and far too confident to be lost hunters. Tawny lifted his head from the steaming kettle and stepped onto the porch rifle already in his hands. A line of figures emerged from the tree line, black against the white. Not rushing, just watching. They're testing, Isaiah muttered, stepping beside him with binoculars. 3 men, maybe 4. Scouting your response. No rush in their stride. That means they ain't worried. Tawny nodded, jaw tight. Grady's letting us know he's close. He wants us to feel surrounded before the real push. From the shadows behind the cabin, Caleb slipped out axe slung across his shoulder, expression hard. Let them look. They'll find more than they came for. The men on the ridge didn't call out. They stood for a moment longer, then turned back into the trees, fading like ghosts. The tension lingered long after they were gone. That night, the cold set in deeper than usual, creeping through the gaps in the log walls like an omen. They gathered in the main room, fire burning low but steady. Ahyoka sat beside it, her carving clutched tightly in her hand. She hadn't spoken not once, but she didn't shy away from them anymore. Her gaze drifted to each voice, each sound. I've been thinking, Isaiah said, cleaning his rifle on the table. Grady knows he can't break this place head on. That's why he's out there ghost walking. He's waiting for us to crack from the inside. He wants fear to do the work, Caleb muttered. Easier than bullets. Chaska stirred from his corner, his voice steady. Then he doesn't know us. Tawny watched the boy closely. There was something steel-like forming in him, still young but hammered by fire. He'd stopped trembling at every noise, started asking deeper questions. Now he sat cross-legged with his own knife, shaping a small stick, copying Caleb's movements in silence. Later, when the others slept, Tawny sat alone on the porch. Moonlight slicing across the snow like broken glass. His memories surged like they always did when stillness settled in the screams from the battlefield. The mangled faces, the friend who'd begged him to end it before the pain did. He lit a cigar with trembling fingers. The door creaked softly behind him. He turned expecting Caleb or Isaiah, but it was a yoka. Barefoot, wrapped in a wool blanket too big for her, her face half lit by firelight. She stepped beside him and looked up at the moon, then down at the snow. Her hand opened slightly, showing him the bird carving. He said nothing. She didn't either. But her eyes met his, and in that moment, Tawny felt something shift, like a current pulling him back toward a part of himself he thought was long buried. From behind them, a voice broke the quiet. "There's smoke on the southern ridge." Isaiah, Tawny was on his feet instantly. How many too far to tell, but it's low. Controlled. Campfire, maybe. They're setting up base close. "We draw a map now," Caleb said, already lighting a lantern. "We mark the routes. We set snares and fallback paths." Isaiah nodded. "They'll come at dawn. Maybe earlier. They won't stay quiet much longer." By morning, the wind had turned harsh, sweeping drifts up against the door. Caleb, Chaska, and Isaiah worked fast, digging foxholes, laying tripwires from Caleb's smithy scraps, covering rifle slots with brush. Tawny carved out a plan: 2 fallback points, high ground sightlines, 1 emergency exit through the ravine behind the cabin. "We don't break ranks," Tawny told them. "If it falls, we fall together." Ayoka watched silently as they moved. She trailed Chaska for a while, handing him nails or bits of wood, her expression focused. When he knelt to set a wire trap, she crouched beside him and held the loop steady. "She's sharper than most grown folks," Caleb said under his breath. "She sees everything," Tawny agreed. "Even what we try to hide." That afternoon, Abigail arrived saddle-heavy with supplies, lips pinched against the cold. Tawny met her by the barn. "You shouldn't be here," he said. She dismounted without a word and handed him a satchel of ammunition. "And leave you with half the county's future behind your walls? Not a chance. Grady could strike any moment. I brought a shotgun, Tawny." He sighed, but he didn't argue. "Anyone follow you?" "No, but folks in town are uneasy. Grady's been buying silence with whiskey and threats. But some are listening. Some remember the old days. Remember you." He looked down at the ground. "They remember a man I buried years ago. They remember the one who built this ranch from nothing, who rode out in storms to save neighbors from flooding, who took in orphans when no one else would. That man's still in there." Tawny didn't answer, but he let her stay. That evening, the firelight in the cabin glowed warmer, flickering off the logs like a heartbeat. Abigail passed stew around. Chaska sat beside Ayoka and showed her how to knot snares. Caleb sharpened blades in the corner. Isaiah cleaned his rifle with the same care a preacher might clean his Bible. Tawny stood back for a moment, watching them. For a flash, the cabin didn't feel like a bunker. It felt like home. Then came the howls, low at first, distant, then louder. Coyotes, maybe, or not. Everyone stopped moving. Tawny's hand was on his rifle before the third cry. He stepped outside, followed by Caleb and Isaiah. Shapes moved just beyond the tree line, too many to be wild animals. Shadows shifted fast, deliberate. "They're probing again," Isaiah muttered. "No," Tawny said slowly. "They're sending a message." From the darkness came a voice, oily and cold. "Y'all really think you can keep her safe out here forever? She's ours. You're just holding what don't belong to you." Tawny stepped forward. "She ain't yours," he called out. "And if you come any closer, I'll put you in the snow with the rest of your ghosts." A pause, then laughter. Dry, humorless. "Sooner or later, your roof will crack, soldier boy." Tawny raised his rifle and fired once into the trees. The laughter stopped. Silence fell again, thick and heavy. Tawny turned back toward the cabin. Abigail met him at the door, eyes wide but steady. "What now?" she asked. He glanced at Ayoka, who sat on the floor by the fire holding the bird in her hand, unmoved. "We don't wait for the next warning," he said. "We prepare for the storm." "We don't break ranks," Tawny told them. "If it falls, we fall together." A bone-deep silence clung to the land, the next morning, the kind that comes before blood spills. Tawny was already outside before first light eyes, scanning the tree line with a steadiness forged in darker wars. His fingers tightened on the leather grip of his rifle. Snow clung to the edges of his boots, melting slow as breath curled from his mouth. Inside, the others stirred. Abigail lit the stove, her movements brisk but quiet. Isaiah sat at the table, sharpening a blade with the rhythm of a hymn. Caleb hauled firewood without a word. Every sound was sharper, heavier, like even the walls knew something was coming. Ayoka had not spoken, but that morning she placed her wooden bird on the mantel next to the family Bible no one touched. It wasn't a gift. It was a signal. She was watching. She understood more than they knew. "Today," Tawny said, stepping into the warmth of the room, "we draw the line." He unfurled a map over the table, traced lines with a thick finger. "They're moving in from the southeast ridge, aiming to cut off the ravine. If they succeed, we lose the only safe way out. We hold the ridge." Isaiah nodded. "How many do you think more than us? Maybe double, doesn't matter." Chaska stood, voice stronger than the boy they first found. "I want to fight." Tawny turned to him. "You already are." "No," Chaska insisted, jaw set. "I want a weapon." Abigail placed a hand on his shoulder, but he didn't flinch. Caleb stepped forward and handed the boy a small hatchet. "You protect Ayoka and Abigail. You hear me? You guard them with this." "That's just as brave." Chaska nodded once, gripping the handle like it was part of him. By noon, the sky had dulled to gray, and the wind cut sideways, biting into their coats. They moved in pairs, positioning along the ridge and the tree line. Tawny crouched behind an outcropping of rock, with Isaiah glassing the woods below. There they were, dark specks shifting between the junipers, staying low. Grady's men, armed, loose formation. Bandits dressed in ranchers' skins. "We don't shoot till we have the drop," Tawny said. "Let 'em come close. Make 'em think we're asleep." Isaiah smiled grimly. "Then we wake 'em up real rude." The first crack came mid-afternoon, a single shot from Caleb's position at the northern slope. A grunt followed, then boots crunching hard through snow. The quiet died all at once. Now Tawny barked. He squeezed the trigger. A man fell in the brush, his rifle clattering down the hill. Isaiah fired next, then again. The smell of gunpowder wrapped around the trees like smoke from a branding pit. The battle wasn't organized. It was clawing, grim, the kind where you saw the whites of the eyes and still didn't know the name of the man you were killing. Tawny moved fast through cover shooting, flanking, then falling back to the next outpost. A grenade cracked the air near Caleb's station, smoke clouding the pines. "Fall back," Caleb shouted. To the cabin, they regrouped behind the barn. Isaiah had a graze on his arm, blood soaking through his coat, but he waved off help. Tawny knelt behind the fencing and spotted a man sprinting toward the cabin, too close, too fast. He lined up the shot and paused. The man was young, no older than Chaska. Eyes wild, lips cracked with fear. He lowered his rifle. Isaiah didn't. The boy dropped in the snow. Tawny flinched at the shot. "He would have killed her," Isaiah said flatly. "You know that." Tawny didn't answer. The truth was, he didn't know anymore. Everything in this fight blurred right and wrong, bleeding into survival. Inside the cabin, Abigail bandaged Isaiah's arm. Caleb stood by the door, rifle ready. Ayoka sat against the hearth, clutching the hatchet Chaska had left in her lap when he went to help with the barricades. Tawny took a breath and stepped toward the girl. You see everything, don't you? She looked up at him, eyes still and quiet. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted. But I won't let them take you. She tilted her head, then reached out and touched the scar on his wrist just once, light as a breeze. He closed his eyes. It wasn't comfort. It was recognition. She had wounds too. She understood his in a way words never could. Later, Chaska burst through the door, face red, breath ragged. There's someone coming in from the river path. Tawny grabbed his rifle. Friend or foe, don't know. Woman. She's alone. They met her at the edge of the ravine. Her cloak was soaked through dark hair, twisted with ice, a revolver in her gloved hand. She raised it, then lowered it just as quick. I'm not here to fight, she said. Name's Elsie. I rode from Blackwater. Abigail's sister. Abigail stepped past them, her mouth opening in stunned silence. Grady's got half the saloon boys under his pay, Elsie said. But not everyone's blind. Folks are talking. Someone's got to stand up. Abigail grabbed her sister's hands. You came alone, didn't trust anyone enough to bring. Tawny nodded. You're welcome here. But if you stay in it. Elsie's eyes flashed. Been in it since they hung my husband without cause 3 years back. I ain't turned my back since. They brought her inside, sat her by the fire. Ayoka stared at her for a long time, then slowly crawled over and curled beside her. Your girl's brave, Elsie said softly. She's not mine, Tawny replied. But I'll die like she is. That night, the snow came heavier, falling in thick, soundless sheets. The fire crackled steady, but nerves hummed beneath every breath. Abigail and Elsie whispered together in the corner, grief and joy passing between them like braided threads. Isaiah stood guard by the window eyes, never leaving the dark. Caleb sharpened his blades again, slower now, thoughtful. Tawny sat at the table, Chaska beside him, marking lines on a new map. We've got 2 days, maybe less, Tawny said. Grady won't wait after today. Chaska nodded. What if we don't make it? We make it. The boy looked up. How do you know? Tawny stared at the bird carving still on the mantel. Because I've seen what dying without purpose looks like. This is worth something. Outside, the wind howled louder, and deep in the trees, eyes watched. I don't know how to fix this, Tawny said quietly, but I won't let them take you. The wind dropped low that morning, but not in peace. It was the hush of breath before a scream. Every creature in the woods seemed to retreat. No birdsong, no rustle of deer. Just a thick stillness that clung to the pine trunks like sweat to skin. Tawny stood on the porch, rifle slung low and eyes on the tree line. He knew what silence like that meant. Something was coming, and it wasn't nature-made. Inside the cabin, Abigail was boiling coffee. The smell filled the room, but didn't soften the tension that wrapped every movement. Elsie checked her revolver again, then slid a long knife into her boot. Ayoka sat near the fire, carving a second bird. Smaller. This one had wings open mid-flight. Caleb and Isaiah were out back reinforcing the rear gate. Chaska was upstairs looking out with a set of binoculars and strict orders to shout the second he saw movement. The ground trembled faintly. Tawny narrowed his eyes. Then he heard it, a low rumble that grew with every second. Hooves. Not one horse. Dozens. He stepped back inside. They're here. Elsie raised her eyes. How many more than we counted on? Chaska's voice rang from above, sharp as a bell. Riders coming fast, 2 wagons too. They all moved in unison. Doors latched, ammunition laid out in rows. Abigail kissed Ayoka's forehead before handing her off to Chaska. You stay in the root cellar, she told them. You don't come out unless one of us opens the trapdoor, you hear me? Chaska nodded, face pale but jaw firm. They vanished down into the cellar, the heavy door shut. Then the first shots cracked like whips against the ridgeline. Tawny took the front. He dropped to one knee behind the fence, eyes set on the opening between trees. He could make out Grady's riders now, 20 strong faces covered with bandanas, rifles slung across saddles. Behind them, the wagons clattered, loaded with barrels that likely weren't just for storing goods. They'd brought dynamite. "They're planning to burn us out," Isaiah said, taking a position near him. Tawny didn't respond. He waited until the first line of horses crested the fence line. Then he fired. The lead rider buckled and fell from the saddle. The others charged harder. Gunfire exploded on all sides. From the barn. From the back ridge. Even the chimney spouted a shot. Caleb had climbed to the roof and was firing with precision, picking off men as they neared. Elsie took the rear porch, her revolver a blur. Her aim was merciless, honed from more than grief. For her, this was justice long overdue. A bottle arced through the sky, Molotov. It hit the west wall and burst into flames. Abigail was already there, smothering the fire with wet blankets. Tawny moved without hesitation. "They'll flank right, cut through the old orchard. Isaiah with me." They sprinted, bullets cracking inches from their path. At the orchard, 3 riders were dismounting, aiming for the back window. Tawny tackled one to the ground, the 2 rolling through the snow, fists and elbows, until Tawny shoved his rifle barrel up under the man's chin and pulled the trigger. Isaiah wrestled the second, finally slamming his knife into the man's ribs with a grunt. The third took off running. Caleb shot him clean from the rooftop. Breathing ragged, Tawny looked around. The snow was trampled, stained with red and gray. The cabin was still standing. But Grady hadn't come yet. That meant he was waiting for something. A loud explosion split the air. The barn roof burst into flame. One of the wagons had made it through and rammed the side. The livestock screamed. Caleb jumped down just in time, his coat catching fire, which he beat off with a snow-drenched tarp. "We hold or we die," Caleb shouted. "Then we hold," Tawny growled. As they regrouped behind the well, another group of riders approached. These weren't Grady's men. They wore the colors of the Kiowa, a few with painted faces, others carrying older rifles, but all riding with sharp precision. At the head rode an older man, hair silver and face lined with age, but posture still iron straight. "Name's Silas Red Elk," he said, pulling up beside Tawny. "You sent for allies," Tawny blinked. "I didn't." Abigail stepped up behind him. "I did. Sent a runner the night after we found Chaska. Told them what was happening." Silas nodded once. "My nephew was taken by Grady's men last season. Never came home. We've had enough." Without another word, the newcomers joined the fray. Grady's men faltered. They hadn't planned for this, another force cutting from the rear, coordinated and sharp. Tawny found Grady in the distance on horseback, standing still, as if calculating. Tawny raised his rifle. Grady raised a hand, signaling retreat. The riders began to fall back, limping or dragging the wounded. The second wagon caught fire before it could turn. Smoke twisted into the gray sky. "They're pulling out," Isaiah muttered, eyes following them. "For now. They'll come back," Abigail said quietly. "Men like him always do." Tawny looked down at the rifle in his hands. "Then we prepare better." Silas dismounted and clapped a hand on Tawny's shoulder. "You've got fighters, but you'll need more than bullets. You'll need a reason to make them never come again." Tawny met his gaze. "What did you have in mind?" Silas glanced at the hills. "The council will want to hear this, but they'll ask who you're protecting and why. You need to be ready to speak truth, not just about Ahyoka, but about yourself." The fire behind the barn still burned. The snow hissed as it tried to smother it. Inside the cabin, Chaska and Ayoka emerged from the root cellar, blinking at the light. "Is it over?" Chaska asked. Tawny bent down. "The battle is. The war's not." Ayoka walked over to the broken front porch, placed her second carved bird on the railing. Wings spread wide. Tawny stared at it, the corners of his mouth barely lifting. Elsie came up behind him. "You gonna tell me what those birds mean?" He shrugged. "I think she's telling us we're not running anymore." "Good," she said, "because I've got an idea. And it might just end this for good." "We hold or we die," Caleb shouted. "Then we hold," Tawny growled. Snow clung to the blood-stained ground like it was trying to erase what had happened the night before. But no amount of winter could whitewash what they'd survived. The barn smoldered still thick with the stench of ash and singed wood. Animals that hadn't made it lay quiet beneath canvas tarps. What remained of the fences was crooked and blackened, but upright enough to tell the world they were still here. Tawny stood near the back gate, his shoulder wrapped in fresh bandages. Abigail had done her best with what herbs they had, but the wound from the flying shrapnel still throbbed beneath every breath. Isaiah limped past him, carrying Plank's jaw set against the pane. No one was speaking of leaving. No one was asking if it was over. It wasn't. Inside, Elsie had gathered them around the hearth. Her hand hovered over a map spread on the table corners held down by bullets and a rusted horseshoe. "We stop waiting," she said. "We end it. I know where Grady's sending his men next." Tawny leaned in. "You sure he's got a second supply run from the South Fork town? Tomorrow night. He's bringing a new shipment of arms up the canyon trail. If we hit that, we don't just send a message, we cut off his power." "A trap?" Caleb asked, voice low. "Of course it's a trap," Elsie answered. "But we know it, and they think we don't. That's our edge." Ayoka sat cross-legged by the fire, her hands stained with ash. She held the wingless bird carving in her lap and didn't look up. "They'll kill you if you go," she said quietly. Tawny's eyes found hers. "That might be true. But if we don't go, they'll come back and kill all of us." Ayoka didn't speak again. Silas Red Elk arrived not long after, flanked by 3 riders. He entered the cabin and knelt by Ayoka, speaking gently in Kiowa. She answered hesitantly at first, then with more strength. The words rolled between them like river water, soft but deep. When they were done, Silas stood and turned to the others. "She told me everything he said, about what Grady did, about how she escaped, about what he's still doing." Abigail's hands trembled. "And the council will meet. But it takes time, and time you don't have. So I brought what I could." His riders stepped forward, each one experienced eyes cold with memory. They weren't there to talk. They were there to fight. "Then we hit the canyon," Tawny said. No, Ayoka whispered. Everyone turned to her. "You can't just burn it all. You have to show them why it has to stop. Why he can't take from us anymore." Caleb frowned. "What are you saying, child?" "I'm saying," she said, "standing now, you need to bring the ones he's hiding. The ones still locked up in that mine. The women, the boys." Tawny exhaled hard. "She's right. Burning the convoy is just fire. But freeing the ones still suffering, that's a reckoning." Silas nodded. "Then we split. 2 teams. One hits the shipment. One takes the mine." Elsie looked between them. "You know they'll be guarded. Brutal men, traps laid." "That's why we're going," Tawny said. "Not to survive, but to finish this." That night they didn't sleep. They packed lightly. Abigail gave each of them a pouch with dried meat and pine salve. Ayoka handed Tawny a new carving, a bird in mid-flight wings whole. It's not for your pocket, she said. It's for your heart. He touched it like it might break. They left before dawn. The wind whipped down from the mountains as if warning them back, but they didn't turn. Silas rode with Tawny and Isaiah toward the mines. Elsie, Caleb, and 2 Kiowa riders went for the canyon. The ride was cold and silent. When they reached the ridge above the mining site, Tawny pulled his horse to a stop. The old silver mine had been shuttered for years, but now it was a live torchlight flickering near the entrance shadows moving between 2 crude buildings. A chain-link fence surrounded the yard, and a tower stood watch at the edge, riflemen pacing. There's more than 10 down there, Silas said. Could be 15. They won't expect a push tonight, Isaiah murmured. Weather's against us. That's why we use it. Tawny slid from his horse. We move in from the ridge, cut the power, go quiet. Find the cells first. They moved like ghosts through the trees, each step a prayer in the snow. At the fence, Isaiah cut the wire with shears wrapped in cloth. No sound. Silas motioned forward. Tawny crept into the compound. The air reeked of smoke, sweat, and oil. One guard sat near the fire, sipping from a bottle, unaware. Tawny was on him in seconds, hand over the mouth knife to the throat. A soft gurgle, then silence. They reached the shack by the mine shaft. Inside, 5 girls no older than a hyoka sat huddled in the corner, bruised, eyes wide with fear. One of them had a bandage soaked through with blood. Tawny dropped to his knees. You're safe now. We're getting you out. The girl with the bandage tried to speak but coughed blood. No time, Silas said. We carry them. They did. 4 to arms, 1 in Isaiah's coat. As they turned for the exit, a shot cracked across the yard. One of the tower guards had seen them. Run, Tawny shouted. Gunfire erupted. The night exploded with fire and fury. They ducked behind the mess hall, bullets chipping wood above their heads. I'll hold here, Silas said. Get them out, no, Tawny growled. We all go. Isaiah fired 3 shots, dropping a man coming around the side. Tawny grabbed a torch and flung it through the back window of the shack. The blaze caught fast. Fire gave them chaos. They made it back to the fence. Behind them, flames licked the sides of the mine. Shouts echoed, riders scrambled. By dawn, they were gone. Back at the cabin, the girls were laid out in the warm room wrapped in blankets. Ayoka tended to them with Abigail's help, whispering words that made them smile through tears. When Tawny walked in, one of the girls reached out. You came, she said, voice like wind through grass. He knelt. We always do. Sometimes just a little too late. Outside, the wind shifted. Not cruel, not warning, just quiet. Burning the convoy is just fire, Ayoka had said, but freeing the ones still suffering. That's a reckoning. The canyon air smelled of sage and gunpowder. Smoke still curled from the scorched wagons, and blood soaked the snow in brown, muddy streaks. A wheel from the lead supply cart spun lazily, creaking in the cold morning light. The ambush had gone as planned, until it hadn't. Elsie crouched behind the shattered axle of her horse's cart hands, shaking as she reloaded. She could feel the wet heat of blood seeping through her coat, not hers, but Caleb's. He lay a few feet away, slumped over his rifle, motionless. Don't let this be for nothing, she whispered, biting down hard on her sleeve to stop herself from breaking. The quote ran through her like a cry. If we fall here, let it be, so others stand higher. That was what Caleb had said right before they struck. They'd waited just past the bend in the canyon trail, where the rock walls narrowed, and the convoy would be forced to slow. Tawny's decoy fire to the east had drawn off some of Grady's scouts, giving Elsie's team the sliver of an opening they needed. They hit the first wagon with pitch oil and fire arrows, causing chaos among the guards. For a moment, it looked like the tide would go their way. Then the trap had revealed itself. Grady's men hadn't been surprised, they'd been ready. From the high ledges came rifle fire, and from behind the wagons more riders than expected poured out like ants from a kicked nest. Elsie had seen Caleb drop one, then two, before the third bullet caught him in the gut. The Kiowa rider beside them, Lone Hawk, had pulled her behind the cart before another shot split the earth beside her cheek. Now all she heard was wind and the soft hiss of dying embers. She crawled toward Caleb's body. His eyes were open barely. Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth. "They took it all," he whispered. "But not our name. Not what we stood for." "Shut up, you ain't dying," she said roughly, hands fumbling for bandages. "I was already dead," he murmured. "Back in Santa Fe, remember you pulled me back once. That's enough for one man." Lone Hawk appeared at her side, breath heavy. "They're pulling back. Took some of their dead with them. Left the crates." Elsie's hands stilled. "What?" "They left the weapons," he said again. "They think they killed us all." She looked at Caleb's still face and then back toward the wagons. Even from here she could see the crates cracked open, the dark gleam of rifles within. "Then we've won more than we thought." Lone Hawk nodded grimly. "We need to go, before they realize." With trembling strength, Elsie slung her rifle and reached for Caleb's body. "No," Lone Hawk said gently. "He stays with the canyon." She opened her mouth to argue, but stopped. Caleb's dog tags were still around his neck. She took them along with the worn piece of paper in his coat pocket, a list of names. Names of men who'd fallen in battles before. She added his at the bottom with her pencil hands numb from cold and grief. They burned the rest. Not just the enemy dead, but the rest of the convoy, every crate of ammunition, every spare rifle. Smoke spiraled up the canyon walls like a funeral pyre. Lone Hawk scattered ash as they rode out, a quiet blessing in the wind. By the time they returned to the ranch, the girls from the mine were sitting up. Ayoka had fed them broth and kept them wrapped in quilts by the fire. Silas's riders helped bring in what little gear they salvaged: extra boots, saddlebags, and the charred lockbox that held Grady's ledger. That was the real prize. Elsie placed it before Tawny without a word. He opened it, flipped through the soot-darkened pages, and exhaled slowly. "It's all here," he murmured. "Every name, every shipment, every bribe." Abigail stepped forward, jaw tight. "Enough to take to a federal judge, enough to put Grady's head in a noose." Elsie's hands shook as she poured a cup of hot water and sat beside the fire. She looked older now, not just from grief, but from knowing they'd done the unthinkable. They'd struck back, and it had cost them. "He was the best shot I ever saw," she said softly. Ayoka placed a hand over hers, then let his story carry. That night the sky cleared. Stars came out in hard clusters, and the ranch felt held in a hush like something sacred had passed through. Silas stood watch with Isaiah near the back gate, rifles in hand. Inside, the air smelled of pine and smoke and healing. Tawny didn't sleep. He stared at the ledger until the candle burned low, memorizing each name. Not just the criminals, but the victims, some buried, some still missing. Some like the girls now resting in the bunkhouse who would carry scars no court could erase. "We need to ride," he said to Silas when morning came. "Now. To where to those judges in Oklahoma territory? To anyone with a badge that hasn't been bought. Grady's not just a local terror. He's a rot, and we've got the proof." "You sure?" Silas asked. "Lawmen can be bought too. That's why we bring the girls. The truth walks taller when you put faces on it. Isaiah stepped forward. I'll ride with you. We'll need fresh horses. Elsie, worn but steady, joined them. I'm coming too. This ledger's no good without someone who can speak it clean. Ayoka stood silently, then went to the fire. She picked up a new carving, this one of a wolf standing tall, eyes carved fierce. For you, she said, handing it to Tawny. Wolves don't run from storms. They lead through them. He took it with care, heart full. They packed quickly. Abigail kissed Tawny's bandaged shoulder and whispered, "Don't let justice turn into revenge." He nodded, but the lines in his brow said the war wasn't done. As they saddled up, the youngest of the rescued girls stepped outside, clutching the wool shawl Ayoka had given her. She didn't speak, just looked at them with wide eyes, full of something more powerful than words' hope. Tawny tipped his hat to her. They rode into the rising light, the ledger sealed in oilskin, the truth heavy in their satchels. Snow melted slowly around them, and the road stretched wide and uncertain ahead. But it was theirs now, blazed by the blood of friends, marked by the courage of those who refused to bow. If we fall here, let it be so, others stand higher. The train screamed into the station at Fort Gibson, like a wounded animal, iron wheels shrieking against the tracks, steam hissing out in long, angry jets. Tawny stepped down from the last car, his boots hitting the platform with a solid thud. Behind him, Elsie, Isaiah, and the two rescued girls followed, each carrying more than just travel bags. They carried proof pain and the kind of stories that made even God go quiet. A deputy with a badge dulled by dust and time met them at the edge of the platform, hat tipped but face wary. "You the ones wired Judge Albright?" Tawny nodded, reaching into his coat and pulling the sealed ledger from its oilskin. "We've got names, documents, and survivors. We're not leaving till someone listens." The deputy's eyes swept the group, lingering on the girls' faces, pale eyes, cautious bruises visible even under their shawls. He gave a tight nod. "Court's in recess till morning. Judge'll see you first light." Tawny's voice was low but hard. "We'll wait right outside his chambers. No one's burying this in paperwork. You don't bring ghosts across the country unless you want them to speak." That night, they stayed at a boarding house just off the square, the kind with thin walls and thicker secrets. Elsie sat on her bed oil lamp, flickering, watching the shadows move across the ceiling. One of the girls, Nessa, barely 15 and still not speaking, clutched her blanket like a lifeline. The other, Martha, stood by the window, eyes locked on the street, as if expecting Grady's men to burst from the dark at any moment. Isaiah sat with them, whittling something quietly, a small horse from a piece of cedar he'd carried since they left the ranch. The scent of it mixed with the sulfur of the lamps, grounding them in the moment. Tawny couldn't sleep. He walked the wooden boardwalks of the town, every creak underfoot reminding him that peace here was just a whisper, not a promise. When dawn cracked over the horizon, he was already standing on the courthouse steps, coat buttoned high and rifle slung across his back like a banner. Judge Albright was an older man, tired around the eyes, but something in his bearing told Tawny he still believed in law like it was church. "You came a long way," the judge said, taking the ledger and flipping through its pages slowly. "Plenty of men say they've got evidence. Most hand me gossip and hearsay. This ain't gossip. It's blood drawn." Elsie stepped forward, voice steady. "I was there when the girls were taken. I buried friends who tried to stop it." Martha stepped beside her, and I remember every face. The judge studied her, then turned to Tawny. "You want justice, I want Grady's power stripped down to its bones. I want the men who held the whip punished, and I want their names to rot on paper so no one forgets." Albright nodded slowly. "You'll get your hearing, but fair warning, Grady's got friends in high places. He's a hydra. Cut one head, another grows. Tawny's jaw tightened. Then we keep cutting. Court convened that afternoon. It wasn't in some grand city hall with marble columns, but in a two-room wood building, where the only air came through cracked windows, and the only fan was a slow-turning blade powered by sweat and prayer. The room filled with lawmen, townsfolk, a few reporters, and more than a few of Grady's men in civilian coats, pretending to be disinterested. Albright called it to order. Case of Grady and Associates, multiple allegations of kidnapping, trafficking, and illegal arms movement. Isaiah handed over the ledger while Elsie gave her sworn statement. Then the girls testified. It was quiet, no grand theatrics, just trembling hands, halting words, and eyes that refused to look at the men seated at the back of the room. Nessa's voice came last, a whisper so soft the court had to lean in. They told us we weren't real people. Said we were just inventory. A murmur rolled through the room. Not outrage, shame, the kind that sticks in the throat and makes even the boldest man look at his boots. Grady's defense tried to brush it aside, called it all exaggeration, emotional instability, said the girls were confused. But the ledger didn't lie. It was date-stamped, signature-marked, and tied directly to the routes Grady's men used to move stolen supplies and enslaved people. The hearing stretched into the evening. By sundown, the judge declared his ruling, formal charges filed, warrants issued, and Grady declared a federal fugitive. Elsie exhaled for the first time in days. Tawny let the tension slide from his shoulders like a dropped pack. Isaiah smiled just once, but it wasn't over. That night, the boarding house windows shattered with a thunderclap. Molotov fire bloomed across the porch. Shouting came from the alley. Gunmen. Elsie grabbed Nessa and dove behind the bed as Isaiah flipped the table and returned fire from the hall. Tawny kicked the door open, shotgun roaring into the smoke. Bullets ripped the wallpaper, splinters stung their arms. They'd sent a message, and now Grady was sending one back. But what he didn't count on was the town hearing it too. Deputies swarmed the street. Townsfolk with rifles fired from their windows. The barkeep from the saloon shot a rider from his rooftop. By morning, the gang was either dead, arrested, or running. Judge Albright, hat in hand, stood amid the wreckage. "You still want that trial?" Tawny, blood on his sleeve, nodded. More than ever. By noon, federal marshals were summoned from the territory. The courthouse stood locked but alive with activity. And for the first time in years, the people of Fort Gibson believed the law might finally work in their favor. Elsie looked at the sky, gray clouds clearing blue, peeking through. "We made noise," she said. "The right kind." Tawny looked past her down the road that led west toward the next town, the next battle. "We're just getting started." Snow drifted like ash outside the courthouse windows, softening the outline of the gallows that had been hastily constructed on the edge of Fort Gibson Square. Inside, the heat from the iron stove fought the creeping cold, but no one felt warm, not even the judge. Tawny stood shoulders broad beneath his worn coat, his hat clenched in one hand. Behind him sat a crowd of settlers, Kiowa farmers, black ranchers, and townsfolk, faces drawn tight with expectation and unease. The rescued girls were absent, hidden away under the marshal's protection. No one wanted to risk another ambush, but Grady's men were present. 3 of them shackled. One of them, the wiry one with the snake tattoo curling up his neck, sneered as the judge read the charges. Elsie sat beside Tawny, jaw-tight hands, fidgeting with the brass buttons on her cuff. The ledger lay open on the clerk's desk, pages marked testimony given. And yet, defense counsel has asked for a delay, the judge finally said, frowning. A sharp rustle of murmurs filled the chamber. Tawny rose. Delay on what grounds? A jurisdictional challenge, the judge replied, voice clipped. They claim the crimes fall under federal military authority, since many of the victims were moved across reservation lines. That's a stalling tactic, Elsie snapped. They're trying to buy time for Grady to slip through the cracks. I'm aware, the judge said heavily. But under territorial law, I'm bound to review the challenge. Tawny looked around the room. People were restless, some angry, some afraid. The momentum they'd fought so hard to build was slipping. Outside, the snow thickened. That evening, as the town huddled into silence, Tawny, Elsie, Isaiah, and Abigail met in the small room above the livery stable where they'd made temporary camp. Maps lay spread on the table along with copies of the court filings. We can't wait for this to grind through the courts, Abigail said, her voice hushed but firm. Grady won't. He's got too many pockets lined with silver. Elsie leaned in, eyes sharp. Then we make him come to us. Come, how Isaiah asked, brow furrowed. Tawny's eyes hadn't moved from the map. His finger tapped a rail line. He's hiding behind men and paper now. But if we cut off his escape, if we make the world small around him, he'll show his teeth. Abigail nodded. We still have names from the ledger. Supply runners, blackmail victims. If we move fast, we can round them up before word gets out. Force his hand, Elsie finished. Tawny leaned back, gaze hard as iron. We won't win this with laws alone. Sometimes the law is just a mirror, and it shows you how ugly power's face really is. That night, teams moved silently through the snowbound town. Deputies, ranchers, a few good men from neighboring towns who'd heard the trial was happening and rode in under the flag of justice. They knocked on doors with quiet urgency. They brought in men too scared to testify before. Women who'd sewn the ledgers, laundered the bloody shirts, buried the truths. By sunrise, the courthouse was full again. And this time it wasn't just a trial. It was a reckoning. Testimonies came fast, and they came heavy. One man, gray-bearded and shaking, confessed to helping Grady move 3 wagon loads of chained children south. He said they were orphans, that they were being relocated. I didn't know, not really. Another woman, hair wrapped in a faded blue scarf, spoke of bribery. He paid me to lie about where the girls came from, gave me more than my whole month's wages. With each name called another thread of Grady's empire frayed. Then the message came. A courier, breathless and pale, burst into the courtroom and handed the judge a crumpled note. The judge read it silently, his hand visibly trembling. Well, Tawny asked, rising slowly. The judge looked at him, then at the room. Grady's been spotted near the Texas line. He's moving with 20 riders armed. A hush swept through the gallery like wind through dry grass. He's not running, Isaiah said. He's coming here. He thinks he can finish it himself, Abigail whispered. Elsie's hand went to her rifle strap. Then we meet him. No. Tawny's voice cut through the room. We let him ride in, let him think he's still feared. Then we show him what truth looks like. The judge stood adjusting his robe. Then I order a full guard posted at the courthouse. Deputize every able-bodied person you trust. Outside, the sky had gone flat and gray. The gallows stood cold and waiting. As the town braced, Ayoka returned from the reservation outpost with news of her own. Grady had tried to buy protection, offered gold and weapons in exchange for silence. But the tribes had refused. The ledger had reached them too. The truth had spread. The elders say if he crosses their land, he dies before his horse reaches the trees, she said simply. Tawny nodded. Good. That evening, the town stood at the crossroads of fear and fury. Bonfires were lit, guns loaded. The people who had once whispered in corners now spoke in clear voices. They weren't just protecting a courthouse. They were protecting a turning point. Elsie found Tawny alone at the edge of the gallows, staring up at the empty noose. "Do you think this is justice?" she asked. "No," he replied quietly. "Justice is making sure this never happens again." She looked at him a long while. "He's coming here with blood on his hands." "I know. You ready to spill some of ours? If we don't stand here," he said, "there'll be nothing left worth bleeding for." She stepped closer, slipping her hand into his. Behind them, Abigail posted watch on the roof of the general store. Isaiah stood at the church bell tower rifle propped beside the altar. The snow fell in thicker sheets now. The whole world seemed to hold its breath. And Grady was coming. Tawny watched the horizon, his breath misting in the cold. "Let him come," he whispered. "This time we're not the ones hiding." The sun didn't rise so much as it bled across the horizon, red and sullen, painting the snow-covered prairie in strokes of warning. The wind came in sharp and dry from the west, brushing against the face of Fort Gibson like a slap. Tawny stood in the center of the square, his boots planted just feet from the gallows. A rifle slung low across his shoulder, his revolver holstered, but ready. Around him, townsfolk lined rooftops and porches. Men and women with rifles, children peeking from behind shutters. The church bell hung still, the rope knotted for silence. He could feel it before he saw it. The tremble in the earth like distant thunder. The whistle of a hawk circling overhead. Then dust. Grady's men came slow, deliberate. 20 of them as predicted. Coats, flapping hats, pulled low. Grady rode at the front, astride a black stallion that snorted steam like a locomotive. He hadn't aged a day, not in the ways that mattered. The same wolfish grin, the same gold-capped tooth flashing in the morning sun. He stopped just shy of the gallows and looked around as if measuring the square for purchase. "Well," he said, voice like gravel dipped in oil. "Ain't this charming?" Tawny didn't flinch. "You brought a lot of men to watch you hang." Grady laughed, slow and genuine. "Is that what this is, a necktie party? That ledger must be heavier than it looks. We've got testimony, names, numbers, and people who finally stopped being afraid." Grady dismounted, tossing the reins carelessly. "Fear's not a vice, friend. It's how the world works. Keeps the weak from wandering off cliffs." He stepped closer. The townsfolk stiffened, rifles cocked, but Grady jabbed a finger toward Tawny. "You don't want fear, do you? You want change. You want law. You want that dream where bad men answer to good ones." He chuckled. "Problem is, the world don't run on dreams." Tawny's voice came like flint. "Maybe not. But it's run on memory, and folks are finally remembering what men like you did to them." Elsie stepped up beside him, rifle-raised coat snapping in the wind. "We're not just standing for the ones who lived. We're standing for the ones who didn't." Grady tilted his head. "So what now? You shoot me in the middle of a trial." No, Judge Albright said, stepping from the courthouse robe, fluttering. "You get your trial. Right here. Right now. Let the record show defendant surrendered under his own arrogance." The townspeople broke into a low ripple of laughter, hard and bitter. The trial moved fast. The judge had no time for Grady's charm or the lawyer he'd smuggled in from Muskogee. Witnesses came forward, Abigail testifying about the forged supply routes, Isaiah with copies of the land fraud letters, Ayoka translating the names of missing Kiowa girls, each name matched to a page in the ledger. Grady yawned at first, then fidgeted, then stopped smiling entirely. When the rescued girls appeared, faces pale, lips trembling, he stared at them with something close to contempt. But it was fading. The town had gathered. every seat filled, every window pressed with watching eyes. Martha, the oldest of the rescued girls, looked Grady square in the face. "You took everything from us, but we got something back you never had." Grady smirked. "What's that, each other? Even a lone match can start a prairie fire if the wind's on its side." The jury, 12 men and women of the territory, half white, half native, one black rancher who'd lost 2 sons to Grady's schemes, deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty, on all counts. The sentence, death by hanging, carried out immediately. Grady didn't beg. He didn't curse. He just stared at Tawny as they led him up the steps. The wind blew harder now, whipping the rope like a snake ready to strike. "You think you changed something?" he called down, voice steady. "You didn't kill me. You just made room for the next one." Tawny looked up at him, eyes hard. "Then we'll stand again." The noose was drawn tight. The lever pulled. The gallows gave a hollow thunk, and Grady fell through the floor. The rope snapped taut. The crowd didn't cheer. There were no hurrahs, only silence. It wasn't victory. It was closure. Later that evening, the town gathered at the church for warmth more than worship. Potatoes boiled in cast-iron pots, cornbread was passed around, and coffee brewed so strong it could have cleared a mule's sinuses. They didn't celebrate, they reflected. Tawny stood by the stove, boots steaming. Elsie joined him, her face flushed, eyes tired. "It's over," she said. "For now," he replied. Abigail came up behind them. "There's more out there, more girls, more men like him." "I know," Tawny said. Elsie turned to him. "But we don't have to ride tonight, do we?" "No," he said, letting a rare smile find his face. "Tonight we rest." Isaiah strummed a banjo near the altar, soft chords rising over the quiet conversation. Ayoka handed out mugs of sassafras tea, her calm presence settling everyone like a blanket. One of the girls, Nessa, climbed into the pew beside Martha and leaned her head on her shoulder. Outside, the wind died down. The town slept under a sky full of stars. And in the courthouse, the ledger was locked in the judge's drawer, its pages worn but preserved. A record of pain, a ledger of justice, the first chapter in a new story. But the fire once lit would burn brighter still. Somewhere out there, others waited, and Tawny knew he hadn't seen the end, just the beginning of something worth fighting for. The thaw came slow. Ice melted from the eaves of the courthouse, one drip at a time falling onto snow-packed earth with the patience of time itself. After Grady's hanging, the town didn't erupt, it exhaled, long and low, like a body that had braced against too much pain for too long. Tawny stood near the fence that bordered the south pasture, hands deep in the pockets of his long coat. A group of riders crested the hill, small against the horizon. Isaiah rode beside them, his shape unmistakable even at a distance, leading a group of Kiowa elders and local lawmen toward Fort Gibson. Behind them rode a wagon. Inside it, bundles, belongings, children, the last of the rescued girls from farther settlements. Ayoka rode with them too, her expression solemn but resolved. She had gone back to find the others moving village to village in the dead of winter. She hadn't asked permission. She hadn't needed to. Tawny stepped forward as they approached. "They're tired," she said, climbing down from her horse, brushing snow from her skirt. "But they made it." He nodded, then reached up and helped lift one girl from the wagon. She clung to a quilt, her eyes wide as a barn owl's lips chapped from wind. Elsie appeared with a mug of warm broth and a steady hand. "It's over," she whispered to the child. "You're safe now. All of you are." But even as she said it, her voice broke. Inside the church, the rescued children gathered beneath patchwork blankets. Some slept in corners, others stared out the window, unsure if this peace was real or just a dream between the nightmares. Martha knelt beside one, humming a lullaby her mother used to sing before Grady's men tore everything apart. Isaiah brought in kindling. Abigail organized boots and coats. Every soul in town seemed to find a job. There was no mayor, no formal orders, just motion kindness and shared grief. Tawny lingered at the church door, watching the snow fall in soft spirals. Elsie joined him. "You haven't said much since the trial." He nodded once. "Words don't always do the work." She placed her hand lightly on his shoulder. "You think he was right, that we didn't stop anything, that there'll just be another Grady?" He met her eyes. "Maybe, but we didn't just stop a man. We woke up a town." Ayoka entered behind them, her voice quiet but firm. "And the tribe talks now. Women are stepping forward, naming names. Elders are backing them. They know the ledger can't be hidden again." Tawny turned back toward the cold. "Then it's not over. It's beginning." The town held a service the next morning, not for a funeral, but for healing. It wasn't in the church. It was under the open sky near the fire circle the Kiowa elders helped rebuild. People gathered, some from Fort Gibson, some from the nearby reservation, even a few from towns that had long avoided each other out of distrust. They brought offerings, bread-dried berries, sweet tea, bundles of cedar, and they sat, quietly, together. Abigail stepped forward first. She read the names. Every girl listed in the ledger, even the ones they hadn't found. Her voice cracked on the last few. Then Tawny stood. He said nothing at first, just looked around the circle, at faces lined with time and sorrow, at young ones who didn't yet know what had been stolen from them. "When I was a boy," he began, "my mother used to tell me the story of the turtle and the fire." Elsie looked up, brow raised. He continued. "The turtle saw smoke rising on the horizon. He didn't know what had caused it, only that something was burning. And he walked toward it, step by step. The fire was too far, too fierce. But he walked anyway, because he said, 'If I don't, who will carry the water?'" Silence followed. Then someone, Abigail perhaps, whispered, "We're all turtles." Tawny gave a small, weary smile. Sometimes justice don't ride in with a badge or a Bible. It walks slow and steady on tired feet. The next week, they rebuilt the schoolhouse. The old one had rotted through seasons of disuse and shame. Now Elsie taught in the mornings, and Martha helped translate between English and Kiowa. Ayoka brought stories from tribal elders, and Abigail started writing them down, preserving the oral truths long ignored. Isaiah repaired fences. He'd started bringing tools to families who'd lost their men. "It's not charity," he said. "It's debt." A new sign was hung above the courthouse public office of tribal and territorial justice. No one had voted on it. No one had needed to. Evenings brought shared meals and porch music. Life didn't go back to what it was. It moved forward into something different. A fragile peace held together not by law, but by memory and choice. One night, as stars spilled thick across the sky, Elsie sat beside Tawny on the church steps. The last of the children were asleep inside, breathing evenly for the first time in months. "Think they'll forget?" she asked. He shook his head. "Scars don't vanish. They just stop bleeding." She leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. "Would you do it again?" she asked after a while. "All of it, even the hard parts." He looked out across the land, the town, the square, the gallows that had already begun to rot from disuse. "Yes," he said, "because justice didn't come with fireworks. It came in quiet mornings, soft laughter, second chances. In eyes no longer darting toward shadows, The sky shifted above them, clouds parting like a curtain, to reveal the moon in all its silver fullness. And somewhere out beyond the hills, across the rivers and ranges, someone else was waiting for the courage to speak, to stand, to carry the water. They wouldn't be alone. Not anymore. The educational lesson learned from this story is that justice isn't always swift, and it doesn't always look like a courtroom verdict. It often comes from ordinary people who decide that silence is no longer acceptable. Standing up against cruelty takes more than courage. It takes community memory and quiet, steady resolve. For older adults, this reminds us that even the most weathered voices still carry weight, and the slow work of change often begins with a single choice to care.